First of all, thank you for coming here to MongoDB.local New York City. I know it's a little early before the keynote's always a little tough to get here, so I appreciate you coming to join and learn about data resilience and compliance strategies here at MongoDB. So it'll be with your headphones there. My name is Evan Roseley. I'm a lead product manager here at MongoDB. My team looks after a bunch of different products, but some of the main ones are our backups, our automation, and our ops manager and cloud manager products, which help our enterprise advanced customers deploy, automate, and monitor their deployments on-premise. Today we'll be talking about, like I said, data resilience and compliance strategies within MongoDB. So let's jump in. First, I'm going to go through a quick agenda just to give you an expectation of what we're looking at today. First is going to be basically what is data resilience. We'll set the stage a little bit because everybody in every company has a little bit different, I think, kind of understanding and background there. So we'll get on the same page first. Then we'll look at global data compromises and trends in 2023. We'll set the stage on kind of what is the current landscape of data compromise, data breach, data exposures, data leaks, and what's happening right now across the world. Then we'll dive into the high level of MongoDB Atlas and what different features we have for prevention of these different types of attacks. And then we'll look at recovery options as well, should we ever need to recover anything within the MongoDB database. Finally, I'm probably actually going to do the Q&A to the side. I think we're going to run about the full 30 minutes, but I'll be over on the side afterwards if anybody has any questions that we can handle those at the end. All right, so let's dive into what is data resiliency. Data resiliency is basically being able to ensure that regardless of what goes on, that your company and your operations can still continue to stay running as pretty much as all times as possible. So now these type of disruptions include any type of attacks or ransomware, malware, those type of things. But it also includes kind of catastrophic failures. So think of a cloud region going down or a hardware failure. Basically, any disruption that you can possibly think of is what we want our data resilience strategy to encompass. And then if something does happen and we can't prevent an attack or something of that nature in one of our systems, we need to make sure that we can recover in a quick and timely manner as well with the proper, accurate, consistent data, right? We have to have that view of the exact data that we want before the attack so that we can go back to it. So let's look at what has been happening basically across the world, across different industries in 2023 with data compromises. So I think the first thing to talk about is kind of maybe define data compromise a little bit. It's basically the umbrella that covers data breaches, data exposures, data leaks. So regardless of whether it's an active attack that is coming in one of your systems, or maybe there's a misconfiguration that allows that data to be publicly accessible, but maybe nobody's actually gotten it yet, that would still be a data exposure and something that's covered under data compromise umbrella. First thing is that global data compromises are still on the rise. So actually last year in 2023, according to the Identity Theft Resource Center, there was 3,200 publicly reported data compromise events in 2023. So the reason I put publicly reported here is this is how the Identity Theft Resource Center kind of measures from year over year because it's hard to actually go into every single company and evaluate that. They use the publicly reported events to understand what it looks like on trends. So these are not everything that's happened. These are the ones that have been publicly identified by the individual companies. And there was 3,200. Now this was a 72% increase over the previous high water mark, which was actually in 2021, and a 78% increase over 2022. So even in the last year or two, there's been still almost basically a doubling of these data compromise events that have been going on. So it's still a very large rise. Now the main attack vector is basically cyber attacks. So what I talked about earlier, which phishing, malware, ransomware, zero-day attacks, those all kind of fall under that cyber attack umbrella where you actively have some sort of criminal trying to penetrate your systems and configurations. 2/3 of those 3,200 attacks were based in this category. So it's by far the heaviest attack vector that is out there right now being used by criminals. And there's a couple of the hardest hit industries are ones that probably maybe a lot of you are from and interested in this talk, but healthcare and financial services. Those by far outweigh most of the other industries. And if we think about it, that kind of makes sense because it has a lot of personal data, especially in healthcare. It's got a lot of background about an individual person. Financial industry obviously has a lot of ties to individual people as well, but there's monetary value with that as well. And then as far as companies impacted, in a separate survey of the cybersecurity leaders for different worldwide organizations, 66% of those leaders said that they had a ransomware attack within 2023. Now it's only a survey, so it's not the broadest range, but it shows how often this really does impact companies across the globe. And actually, if you look at the US publicly traded companies here in the United States, in 2023, a little over 9% of those companies issued a data breach notice in 2023. So basically 1 out of 10 publicly traded US companies had some sort of event that they publicly acknowledged and made a note about in 2023. So we all assume those are the people leading the way in security, and they still have these issues. So this is a serious thing that we need to take not only with our database, but the rest of our systems as well, to make sure that we can, again, not have a real long disruption in any type of event like that, and hopefully prevent it from ever happening in the first place. So let's look at some of the cost impact when we have different types of cyber attacks across the globe. First, the global average for a company is a $4.45 million per attack. So that's not for the total year, that is for the one individual attack. And there's companies that have multiple of these a year if they don't have their security system set up properly. So this can really start to add up. And if we look at the United States as a whole, the average is double that, and about $9.5 million for US companies. So it's a very large cost. We'll talk about some of the little brand reputation that comes along with it as well, but purely monetarily, this can really start to have an effect, let alone how your customers may start to view your different systems or corporations that come along with that. So let's dive into some of the big contributors to this. There's 3 main factors that drive into the cost. Number 1 is detection and escalation. So it's understanding that you have some event going on in the first place, that your data is compromised, recognizing that, understanding where it's happening within your systems, and then the escalation of that, trying to handle that event, understanding what can we do, what is the system, and how can we prevent that penetration from continuing. So that's the top cost factor that goes into that 4.45 million. And then next is loss of business. So this can be in a multiple kind of pieces and different parts, but usually it's system being down. So maybe you have some sort of event, the system was either brought down by the attacker, or you have to bring it down to fix the system to ensure that you have that security. So a loss of business of actually your systems being down for a certain amount of time. This could also come from developer productivity. If you have to take developers from other projects and features that they were working on, you're taking their time from what the business plan was and the quarterly plan was and dragging them into these events. And for anybody that's had any unfortunate experience with this is not generally a day experience, right? Going and remediating this takes a very long time and goes through usually weeks, if not months for some companies, depending on the type of attack and what system it's on. And then finally, the post-breach response. So there's public notifications, there's ensuring that your system in wherever the attack vector was is secure. There's also generally now looking at your wider security and actually now trying to implement a data resilience strategy for the company as a whole. But those are the 3 top main ones. And if you look at the 4.45 million, each of those are about $1 million, with the detection and escalation being about 1.5 million on average. Again, that's global. US is about double that generally within any type of data breach attack. So I mentioned some of the heavily targeted industries already. It stays consistent here, but each of the 3 that I'm about to show have all had a doubling of their number of publicly reported data compromise events in 2023. So again, healthcare is the number 1 there as far as the number of attacks in 2023. Financial services is number 2. And then interestingly enough, transportation had a large jump in last 2023 with all the information that they had. Now healthcare, this is their not a title they probably want to claim, but their third year in a row of having the highest cost of data breaches per attack. So they were actually almost triple the global average just for healthcare alone, at $11 million per attack on average for the healthcare industry. So it's a very serious thing extra for them. Financial services came in second there. It's lower, but it's not actually any much better. It's still higher than the global average, but it was about $6 million on average for financial services when they had a breach. So again, it's serious for all types of companies, but there's definitely industries that are targeted more due to the type of information that are held within those systems. So let's talk a little bit more about the attack vectors. We talked about cyber attacks already being 2/3 of that event. So again, these are phishing, ransomware, malware, zero-day attacks, all of those fall under that. Anywhere where an identity theft and criminal is actively looking to penetrate an existing system and looking to exploit that. Now, 5-10 years ago, a lot of these criminals usually used trying to lock the system and holding the data for ransom, but they've now moved into more deliberate attacks where they're actually deleting the data or stealing the data and actually selling it to third parties. So the use of this data is becoming much more prominent by these criminal, cybersecurity criminals. And actually what we're seeing, anecdotally, there's not a ton of evidence on this now, but anecdotally we are also seeing in the industry a lot of generative AI use with this data as well. So they're making the impact even larger with the data that they've stolen through generative AI. You can imagine how much more sophisticated maybe a phishing attack would be when you have generative AI using a lot of information and making a more compelling message to get those users to click in different ways and give up additional information about themselves. Another trend here with cyber attacks is also attacking the actual supply chain. So instead of targeting a large financial or healthcare industry, they're looking to attack the supply chains that are feeding into those systems. Generally, sometimes those supply chains have weaker security, so it's actually easier for them to penetrate in. And also it gives them the added benefit that those supply chains generally work with multiple large organizations. So instead of trying to penetrate one more difficult large organization, they go the level down and they actually have access to more than one large organization, so they get more bang for their buck, so to speak, as they go through their attacks. So that's definitely a trend that has happened not only in the last year, but more in 2023. Now, another area that accounts for about 20% of all cyber attacks is system and human error. Now, this is not people that are actively trying to go attack their own companies. These are misconfigurations of systems or lack of configuring a system and different authorization or authentication. So think of a system where maybe we thought we had this set up, but we go in and actually, the security team missed this area, or the password was shared and it's a general password. It's surprising how many people, even in large companies, you can hear about even publicly that announce that the attack was due to a weak password that comes along. So some things that we consider basic are still areas that we need to incorporate when we talk about a data resilience strategy. Another piece of this, which goes outside the attack vectors, but falls in kind of that catastrophic failure bucket, is that the vast majority of IT issues and failures are also generally actually from human error as well. So when we look at these systems, this could also be somebody doing something in production and accidentally deleting information or deleting a configuration, and maybe this brings down a system. It's not an outside attack, but just human error alone is something that we have to look at. And unfortunately, because developer productivity is usually top of mind for a lot of our organizations, developers still sometimes do their changes in production without actually testing. And that can cause some issues as well. So those are things that we really need to focus on, as it can drive a lot of different areas. Again, most of today we're going to be talking about kind of those attack vectors, but that catastrophic failure and hardware failure is absolutely part of that data resiliency that we want to look at as well. Now, turning to malicious people that are trying to do bad within possibly our own companies, is potential bad actors. This is the third kind of out of the rankings of how the different attacks have happened over 2023. So it's not nearly as much as the other, but it does still happen and are still areas that we have to consider. Usually because bad actor attacks are more disruptive and more detrimental to companies, because think of it like an insider knowledge, right? They know the systems, they generally know what information they're going after. They may know where there are weaknesses in the system or what's not already protected. So they really look to try to exploit the system in probably the worst way. So while our IT teams have the hard job of doing 100% of the time protecting outside attacks, one internal attack can do much more damage than anything sometimes outside, depending on the attacker and their knowledge and previous of the system. So we really want to make sure that we're also incorporating that within our data resilience strategy. And then last but not least, it's way different than it was a decade ago, but physical attacks still do happen. So people stealing laptops, stealing documents off of desks and things like that, or leaving them around in airports or wherever you may be traveling. It's obviously much lower than it was a long time ago, but it's still things that show up in these publicly reported information, even though we assume we have all of that locked down and there's no issues there. So those are the 4 main attack vectors, and each are unique, right? So there is no one thing that we can do, one area of the system that we can focus on. Like I said, IT teams are always looking at different securities. They're constantly going through the systems, looking at how the different configurations are set up. So we really have to have a data resilience strategy that is inclusive of all different aspects and all different possible failures. It seems like a daunting task. There's a lot to do, especially for the people that are assigned to setting these up. But we really need to make sure that we look at all these different areas, because each of those publicly reported events, most of them come through a different way, right? The attackers now are very apt to kind of prodding the fence and seeing where that weakness is so that they can gain access. And we also need to consider well-designed high availability with this as well, right? So again, something outside of the attack vector, but with catastrophic failures, maybe a cloud region going down, we want to make sure that our system can still stay up and running in those types of disruptions as well. So there's 2 things. There's the prevention aspect. Let's make sure we don't have any disruptions in the first place. Try to make those attacks unsuccessful. And then if we do have anything that we ever need to recover, make sure that we can actually recover with the data that we expect to have at that time. Now there's plenty of standards and regulations. Again, depending on the industries that you're all from, I'm sure you have specific ones to you. Some of the main ones that we hear a lot are SOC 2, AppJ, HIPAA, and then PCI for credit card information. I'm sure if you're outside of the financial industry or the healthcare, there's others that you probably have to go with. But these regulations are getting more and more stringent every year. Every time we talk to a customer, it can be the same customer that we've had for 6 or 7 years, they come to us with a new thing that they're looking for their regulations and requirements. So we know these are expanding. And while it can be a pain when we have to implement new things, this is really all around driving and making sure that we have a good data resiliency plan and strategy in place so that we can prevent the disruptions. So it's something that, even though it seems like a hassle, is really important for our companies and also ultimately our end users and their data that they have there. So how can Atlas easily support your data resiliency, right? Again, there's a lot of different ways there. We really want to focus on what we can do to help as much as possible. Ultimately, it is up to all of your systems, not just your database, but all of your systems to ensure that those are set up correctly. But we want to make this as automated and policy-driven as possible. So we want this to be as much all in one platform as we can. So everything that we can do within MongoDB Atlas, we want to make that and expose that there so that you have the access to do that. And we want it to be turnkey and at scale as well. So as your data grows, I haven't heard anybody that says their data is going to get smaller in the next couple of years. So as your data grows, we want to make sure that these aren't things that you constantly have to reconfigure every week or every month, right? We want it to be able to grow with your strategy and with your data size as you go, to make sure that you have those good policies in place. And as much as we can, optimize that developer productivity, right? If your developers that are sitting there and configuring the security all the time, that's taking away from your features, your products that you're trying to push out to drive that revenue. So those are things that we focus on to try to make this as easy as possible. So like I said, the first bucket is prevention. What are some of the areas that we can look at to prevent these attacks from being successful? There will be probes, there will be attempts, but we want to make sure that they're unsuccessful. Now, in MongoDB database itself, but I've expressed in Atlas as well, there's basically 4 major buckets. The first is authentication and authorization. The second is TLS and SSL, so as your data is moving, make sure it's secure as it's moving across different areas and being used. There's encryption, so making sure that that data, if there somehow is an exposure of that data actually isn't useful based on just looking at it. It's actually encrypted and randomized. And then auditing and log redaction. So we generally, on the auditing side, need to not only prove to ourselves, but also usually the regulators, that we are following the rules and that we have these strategies in place. And then log redaction, anytime that we're trying to support or run any investigations internally, we want to make sure that we don't have those data leaks or exposures by purely just trying to help support our different teams. So making sure that that sensitive data is redacted. So some features to consider within these 4 buckets, specifically for compliance and data resiliency. One is role-based access controls and IP access lists. MongoDB Atlas actually has role-based access controls enabled by default, so that's mandatory within your systems to provide you security out of the box by default on MongoDB Atlas. But you can also pair that with IP access list to ensure that even the right people can only access your systems through the secure IPs that you are known and trusted. So it gives you that extra layers that's not just out there for everyone to potentially go through that authorization. We have also, in the last 12 months, added OpenID Connect authentication to this. So this basically allows you for your single sign-on, just like you do for your other systems. You can use that single sign-on, which generally has all of the right people and already assigned to the right groups, to really connect between your MongoDB database and your third-party identity provider. So that has been GA'd in 7.0, MongoDB 7.0. So again, you can use that on-premise, but you can also use this in MongoDB Atlas and really bolster and tie it into your existing things to make it, again, all-in-one as much as we can with those identity providers. Encryption at rest using customer key management. So by default, the disk and the volume themselves in MongoDB Atlas clusters are already encrypted at rest. But you can additionally option for your data files themselves to be encrypted and fully randomized at the actual storage engine layer, so that as that data is moving around, the data is still encrypted at the actual file level, giving you kind of that double protection there. Again, you can tie this in with your different cloud providers, AWS, Azure, Key Vault, Google Cloud, Key Management, all of those work with this. And then we actually have a talk going on right now about queryable encryption, which if you have more questions, I would encourage you to probably watch the video after this. But queryable encryption and client-side field level encryption are great ways, especially for data like PCI or HIPAA, where there's really sensitive fields that you have, to ensure that that type of data is locked down and that the actual field values and the field and the values there are not able to be seen by the database at all. So this is fully encrypted and randomized on the client side before ever getting to the database. So the database has no knowledge of what that real field value is. And the cool part with queryable encryption is that you can do all of this while maintaining the ability to run expressive queries within MongoDB Atlas. We have some announcements on queryable encryption for some improvements that we've made here. Again, we have another talk by one of our leaders, Ken, talking about some advancements that we made here. So we're making it even more expressive. So look out for the keynote. I think we're going to be talking about it in there. There's also another session in security that I'll mention here in a second where we go over this a little bit in more detail if you're curious. But this really gives you that level, especially again for those really sensitive personal information fields, to go in and ensure that that data is always encrypted, but still being able to be used through your normal daily operations. And then finally, this one kind of goes across prevention and recovery, is your backup compliance policy. So in MongoDB Atlas, you can set it up to where you have a predefined time for all of your clusters in a project for your backup retention. And what that means is that no one, regardless of the role or authorization that they have within MongoDB Atlas, can go and delete a backup before that predefined range. So if you say that, hey, I want to make sure that I have all of my daily backups for 7 days, and that's a mandatory requirement across all of my projects, you can go in and set that up and make sure that doesn't matter if the organization owner goes in, they can't delete those backups, so that you have that regardless of what's going on, and can always have those backups at your need if you do need to recover. So switching to recovery, why is it important to recovery, right? Everybody has backups probably. If I asked how many people raise their hands, probably 90% of the room says we have that covered. Well, actually, in what they found in surveys is that only 23% of companies could actually recover after a ransomware attack. It could be a variety of things. Maybe they had multiple systems that they needed to recover, and one of them wasn't able to recover. Maybe the hackers actually deleted the backups, which again is why we have the backup compliance policy, because that has been a theme within the attack vectors. Maybe we weren't trained as well as we thought on the recovery process, right? Maybe it took a lot longer than we ever could have imagined, because we thought we had most of the data, but there was actually a section that wasn't there, and that was the important metadata that we needed to get back up and running. So that's why recovery is so important, and why here at MongoDB we look to try to make it a one-stop shop as much as possible, so that you have all of these right at your fingertips, and again, it's all set up to where it works for you once it's initially set up with that initial schedule. So the first thing to point out is what we call continuous cloud backups, and that gives you the point-in-time ability to target, let's say, even down to a specific timestamp of an operation or a write or an update, to go back and recover all the way up to that specific granular time. So if you know the time that maybe a human accidentally deleted some data and you need to get back to that, you can go right to the timestamp to that event. You can also, in prevention of that kind of multi-region and maybe catastrophic failure, you can copy your backups with multi-region snapshot distribution to multiple cloud areas. So basically any cloud area that's offered within your cloud provider in Atlas, you can choose to copy your backups over there. So say your primary region went down for whatever cloud provider you're using. Normally you'd have to wait for that to come back up to be able to get back up and running. With this, you can go pull that back up from another region, go start your cluster back up in another region, and get back up and running as quickly as possible. And we've made some improvements here that our restore times are getting faster for these cross-region and cross-project as well. So those are some improvements on the Atlas backup sides. And then finally, I know there's a lot of requirements for air gaps and making sure that you have multiple copies. You can always download your snapshots from MongoDB Atlas to your own hardware or media. You can also export them to S3 in a JSON format. Nice part about that is some companies have a requirement that they have to be able to continue to operate and do business if MongoDB disappeared. We're not going anywhere, but that is some of the regulations and requirements. And with that export in JSON format, you can fulfill that. Today that's only S3, but later in the year we are actually adding Azure and GCP support, so that will be coming very soon as well. And then finally, this is all policy driven, right? We wanted to have it set up, scheduled, make sure that you understand your policy, have the backup compliance policy set up to ensure your backups are there, and you don't have to think about that in the future. So as a recap, we want that enterprise protection built in. We want prevention and recovery. We want to make sure that ideally we never need recovery. We need to have it there. We need to have it as an option. Hopefully we don't ever have to use it because our prevention and security techniques are locked in. We want it automated and policy driven. Again, we don't want to have to deal with this every day. We don't every week want to have to go in and reconfigure this. We want it to continue to work at scale and make sure it's as turnkey as possible. Doesn't mean that we can ignore it. It's not a set it and forget it cooker. We need to pay attention, but we want to make sure it's as easy as possible to implement. And we want all of that because we want to maintain developer productivity, right? Keep the operations going smoothly. Let's focus on the features and products that we have that drive revenue as much as possible. And partner with us. We've had a lot of experience working with a lot of different companies on FedRAMP, SOC 2, AppJ, HIPAA, anything that you can talk about. We've had those experiences here within MongoDB. So our teams can help you answer those questions, even if they're not something that's specific to the database. We can generally guide you through how that works with the rest of your systems and how that gives you the overall compliance there. Now I mentioned there is more in-depth sessions today. I just hit on the high levels, but our Director of Product Management for Security, Salman, is actually leading an in-depth with the new data security capabilities in MongoDB. Later today, Caddy Corner from here at Bryant Park at 4:30. So he has a lot of great information. He's going to touch on queryable encryption. He's going to touch on access management, identity management, some of the new things that we're doing there. So make sure that you catch them there if you have an interest in the security piece and digging more into those specific features. Last couple of slides, next steps. This is a white paper that will give you more in depth. It's about 10 pages that goes through the different various capabilities that we have. It talks about how to set up your backups if you have a specific maybe type of industry that you're looking for. So I'd encourage you to go through there, and I'd encourage you to do it sooner rather than later. You want this to be done before the next attack attempt happens, not after, right? And then one more QR code here. This is how you can configure specific settings. So this is our documentation. If you already know there's some security, but you're not exactly sure how to actually implement that, that document page will help you walk through some of actually implementing and configuring those features. I've run completely my time, so I'm going to stand to the side if anybody has anything for Q&A. Would love to have you around. Finally, if you do have time to leave some feedback in the app, we love understanding what we can do better to make these sessions more valuable to you. You also get points by rating the feedback, and the points go to eventual swag if you rate a couple. So if you want some swag, you can go in there and rate this session or any other session that you have. We'd really appreciate that. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Get some refreshments before the keynote. I think the keynote starts in about 20 minutes. So get a restroom break and some refreshments, and then look out for all the great announcements there. Appreciate your time and have a great rest of the day.